The warship had been sitting in orbit for years, ignored and half forgotten by the fleet it once served. Its metal hull, once polished and bright, was now faded by time and cosmic dust. It was called Vigilant Dawn, though many joked it should have been named Silent Dawn because no one expected it to ever see real action again. It was one of those ships that survived too many upgrades, too many changes, and too many leadership shifts. Somewhere along the way, it had become just another relic of an older era, a reminder of when humanity still fought with raw courage rather than advanced technology. The crew was small, barely enough to keep the systems running. They were assigned there not because they wanted to be, but because there was nowhere else to send them. Some were nearing retirement, others were too inexperienced for major assignments, and a few just didn't fit the strict discipline of newer, more advanced fleets. The Vigilant Dawn had become a quiet refuge for the forgotten, a place where no one expected miracles or even movement. But despite all of that, the people on board still took pride in their work. They checked the engines every morning, ran diagnostics by hand, and maintained the old weapon systems even though they hadn't been fired in years. There was something sacred about keeping the ship alive. It wasn't about orders or medals. It was about respect, for the craft, for history, and for the countless unknowns still waiting in the void. Outside the ship's windows, the stars stretched endlessly, cold, distant, and silent. Every once in a while, a passing cargo vessel would send a short greeting, mostly out of courtesy. The galaxy had moved on. Newer ships, faster than light itself, now patrolled the main routes between colonies. Massive dreadnoughts guarded the inner systems, and far away on the edges of explored space, the Vigilant Dawn drifted quietly through its assigned patrol sector, forgotten by most, but still loyal to the mission. The captain of the ship was a quiet, steady person who didn't care much for rank or fame. They had seen the fall of colonies, the rise of alliances, and the cold politics that decided which planets were worth saving. To them, this ship wasn't a punishment. It was peace. It was a chance to command something pure. A ship run not by artificial intelligence or automated systems, but by human hands, human minds, and human hearts. Every bolt, every sound, every flicker on the screen meant something. You could feel the ship breathe when you were close to it. The crew had developed a kind of rhythm over time. They spoke little, but worked well together. They shared old stories during night shifts, stories about the first space explorers, about ships that went too far and never came back. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they fell silent. Space had a way of making you feel both small and infinite at the same time. It reminded you that no matter how far technology went, people were still fragile beings trying to make sense of the endless dark. Then, one quiet day, something unusual happened. A transmission came through, faint, static-filled, barely audible. It was from a remote colony near the edge of the sector. The message repeated the same phrase again and again. Unidentified energy surge detected, requesting verification, and then nothing. The signal stopped. At first, the crew didn't think much of it. Out there, communications often failed because of solar storms or unstable relays. They filed a report and went back to their routine. But the captain wasn't convinced. They ordered the sensors to run a deep scan in the direction of the last signal. For hours, the monitors showed nothing but blackness. And then, just before the system timed out, a faint reading appeared. Something that didn't belong. It wasn't a ship, at least not one anyone recognized. The energy pattern was irregular, like it was alive but not biological. It moved slowly, deliberately, almost like it was watching. The crew shared uneasy glances but said nothing. Space was full of strange things. Fragments of old stations, forgotten probes, drifting wrecks. But this was different. It had purpose. The report was sent to command, but as usual, there was no reply. Days passed. The readings vanished and everything returned to normal, or so it seemed. The Vigilant Dawn resumed its patrols, scanning empty regions of space where nothing ever changed. Yet the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone anymore. Life aboard the old ship went on as usual. The engines hummed softly. The lights flickered during power checks. Meals were simple. Recycled protein packs and the occasional fresh fruit delivered from passing transports. The crew laughed at small things. Someone played old songs during maintenance shifts. Someone else had started growing plants in recycled water tanks. In their own quiet way, they had turned the warship into a home. But beyond that fragile piece, the galaxy was changing. Unknown to the small crew, entire colonies were beginning to go silent across the outer sectors. At first, it was blamed on natural causes: magnetic storms, reactor failures, pirate activity. But the truth was much darker, though no one realized it yet. The vigilant Dawn was drifting toward the edge of something it was never meant to face. One evening, while most of the crew rested, the ship's old radar picked up a strange fluctuation again, the same as before, only stronger. This time, it was moving directly toward one of the nearby mining colonies. The captain ordered an immediate course change, even though they weren't given permission. The engines roared to life for the first time in months. The hull creaked under acceleration, but the ship responded, slow but steady, like an old soldier rising to duty again. As they neared the colony, the readings grew unstable. The signal was unlike anything they'd seen before. No pattern, no signature, no life signs. Just energy. Pure and immense. The colony didn't respond to calls. Only static filled the comms. The crew exchanged tense glances. The captain didn't speak, just gave a small nod. The ship descended toward the planet's orbit, scanning the surface below. What they saw made no sense. The colony was intact. Buildings, power grids, ships all perfectly in place. But there was no movement, no light, no heat signatures. It was as if every living thing had simply vanished. No signs of struggle, no damage, nothing. Just eerie stillness. They recorded everything and sent it to command again. This time the reply came fast but cold. Do not engage. Maintain distance. Continue observation. That was it. No reinforcements. No urgency, no care. To the higher ranks, it was just another anomaly in deep space. The vigilant Dawn was left alone once again, to watch something no one else wanted to see. Days turned into weeks. More colonies near the same sector started to go quiet. Trade routes that were once full of life became empty. The crew of the vigilant Dawn grew restless. Some wanted to turn back. Others wanted to investigate further. The captain listened to them all, then simply said, "We stay. If something's happening out here, someone needs to see it." That decision changed everything. The old warship, once forgotten and ignored, now drifted closer to the edge of the unknown. Its engines hummed against the silence of space. Inside, the crew prepared the sensors, repaired the weapons, and double-checked every system as if instinct told them something was coming. The old ship had no powerful shields, no modern defense systems, but it had something the newer ones lacked. It had people who cared, who refused to give up even when the galaxy didn't notice them. Every night, the captain would walk through the quiet halls, running a hand along the cold metal walls. It wasn't a perfect ship, but it was theirs. And maybe, in a strange way, it still had one more purpose left. The crew didn't talk about fear anymore. They talked about readiness. They laughed at the idea that anyone still remembered them. In the Grand Fleet's records, they were a line item, a low-priority patrol unit. But out there, among the silent stars, they were the only eyes still watching. The engines glowed faintly as the ship turned toward the dark side of a nebula. The stars disappeared behind the thick clouds of gas, painting the windows in a deep red haze. The sensors flickered again. A faint signal appeared, and the same unknown energy, stronger than before. It wasn't random this time. It was moving straight toward them. The captain stood quietly on the command deck. The crew waited for orders. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, stretching across the room like a living thing. Finally, the captain gave a single order: hold position. And so they did. Outside, in the endless dark, something unseen was drawing closer. The vigilant Dawn stood alone, its old engines humming softly, its lights flickering like a heartbeat in the void. No one in the galaxy cared. No one expected anything from them. But soon everyone would remember the warship no one took seriously, the one that waited in silence while the stars began to change. The following weeks were filled with quiet tension. The vigilant Dawn drifted through the cold emptiness of space, its sensors constantly sweeping for signs of the strange signal. The crew could feel it, that uneasy sense that something was watching them from far beyond the reach of their scanners. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. The silence of deep space had changed. It wasn't calm anymore. It felt heavy, like the air before a storm. The captain spent long hours in the command room staring at the glowing screens that never seemed to show enough. Reports were still being sent to command, but there was never a useful response. The messages were all the same: Continue observation. Maintain distance. Do not engage. That single order felt more and more like abandonment. The galaxy was big, far too big for one old ship to matter. But it was also empty in a way that made small things feel huge. Every flicker on the radar, every whisper of static on the comms, every unexplained reading made the crew stop what they were doing and look up. They had been sent to watch, yet no one had told them what they were really watching for. The next sign came slowly, faint at first. The nearby trade route went dark. Cargo vessels that passed through this sector every few days stopped sending messages. Even automated supply drones vanished from the network. At first it looked like a system failure. Then one of the outer satellites stopped transmitting completely. The Vigilant Dawn launched a small probe to investigate. It took 2 days to reach the area, and when the images returned, they showed nothing but drifting pieces of metal. The fragments weren't from a collision. They weren't melted or burned. It was as if something had simply taken the ships apart, cleanly, precisely, leaving no sign of who or what did it. The crew gathered around the main screen in silence. No one spoke. There were no scorch marks, no weapon trails, no sign of life, just floating debris turning slowly in the starlight. One of the younger engineers looked at the captain as if asking for reassurance, but the captain said nothing. Words felt useless. That night, the captain sent another message to command, this time marked urgent. The reply came half a day later. It was short. Do not interfere. Support vessels en route. But no vessels ever came. Days passed, and the old ship continued to patrol the empty corridor of space, waiting for help that never arrived. The crew started to talk less. Meals were eaten quietly. Even the usual small jokes that once filled the long shifts disappeared. Everyone focused on work, because working was the only way to stay calm. The ship was their only piece of home in the endless dark, and they needed it to stay alive. During one long shift, the communications officer picked up something unusual, a distress call repeating over and over again from a mining world at the edge of the sector. The voice was full of static, but a few words could be understood. Lights in the sky, no contact. Losing power, then silence. The crew stared at the playback again and again. It wasn't a storm or a system glitch. It was real fear in that voice. The captain didn't wait for permission this time. The Vigilant Dawn set course immediately, engines pushing harder than they had in years. The ship shook slightly as it jumped through the dust fields, the old frame groaning like it remembered what battle felt like. When they arrived 3 days later, the mining world hung below them like a shadow. The entire surface was dark. The colony grid, which should have been shining with thousands of lights, was black. Power readings were faint, almost gone. There was no movement, no ships in orbit, no transmissions. They tried to hail the planet. Nothing. Not even static this time. It was as if the entire world had gone silent at once. The crew sent a small drone down through the thin atmosphere. The video feed showed empty streets, machines still running, doors open, tools scattered as if people had left in the middle of their work. The world looked untouched. No explosions, no fires, just quiet emptiness. When the drone flew past the main power facility, it found every system drained. The reactors were cold, as though something had taken all the energy and left nothing behind. The readings made no sense. The captain stared at the data, then gave a quiet order to pull the drone back. There was something deeply wrong there, and no one could explain it. Command was informed again. This time there was no answer at all. The message vanished into silence, just like everything else. For the next few weeks, the Vigilant Dawn became the only active ship still reporting from the entire region. It wasn't meant to handle something like this. Its sensors were old, its engines weak, its weapons outdated. But the crew refused to turn back. They began tracking the strange energy readings that kept appearing and disappearing without pattern. Each time they moved a little closer, hoping to understand. What they discovered changed everything. One of the readings wasn't random. It was following them. The signal stayed just outside their scanning range, always distant but always there. Sometimes it faded for days, then returned stronger. The captain realized it wasn't a natural phenomenon. Something intelligent was out there observing them. The crew became restless. Sleep was hard to find. The ship's corridors felt colder, quieter. People began to keep personal lights on in their quarters at all times. Even the hum of the engines sounded different, thinner, like the air itself was nervous. One evening, while running routine scans, the sensors suddenly detected a short pulse of light from deep space, faint but sharp. It lasted only seconds, then disappeared. Moments later, the ship's systems flickered. Lights dimmed. A low vibration ran through the hull like a whisper. It stopped as quickly as it started. The engineer's report showed no damage, no impact, nothing mechanical. But everyone had felt it. It was as if something had passed through the ship rather than around it. After that, the captain ordered constant monitoring. No one was allowed to sleep while off duty. Someone had to be awake at every console every moment. They didn't know what they were looking for, only that they couldn't afford to miss it. Days turned into long stretches of silent waiting. The stars outside the windows looked the same, but the crew could sense that the emptiness was no longer safe. The galaxy that once felt vast now felt like a trap. Finally, a small break came in the monotony. Another colony, far from their patrol route, sent a transmission. Short, frantic, and incomplete. The only clear words were, "They're not ships. They're something else." Then the signal cut. The captain didn't share the full message with the crew, but word spread quickly anyway. Everyone could feel the fear beneath the silence. They started preparing the ship without being told. Reloading old missile bays, checking weapon mounts, reinforcing airlocks, sealing unused corridors. The Vigilant Dawn was never meant for frontline combat anymore, but the crew worked as if a war was coming. The strange thing was, no one had told them to do it. It was instinct. A human instinct that sensed danger before logic could catch up. One night, during a systems check, the youngest technician looked out through one of the observation panels. Far off, beyond the asteroid belt, a faint shimmer crossed the star, like a reflection on water. It was gone almost instantly, but it had moved. It wasn't natural light. It was too straight, too deliberate. When the technician reported it, the captain ordered the ship's long-range sensors to focus on that area. For hours, the data showed nothing. Then, as the ship adjusted position, something appeared, a shape distant but massive, blocking starlight like a shadow with no source. It wasn't listed in any chart or database. It wasn't a rock or a planet. It was something else. The captain didn't call command this time. There was no point. The ship stayed silent, drifting slowly behind a cluster of dead satellites. The crew worked in whispers. Every sensor was locked on the shadow. Every movement watched carefully. The readings showed no life signs, no radio signals, no propulsion systems. And yet it moved. Not fast but steady, gliding across space with a kind of eerie grace. The Vigilant Dawn trailed it at a distance, recording everything. Hours passed. Then the shadow simply vanished. Not into hyperspace, not behind a planet. It just faded, leaving behind a strange distortion that made every monitor flicker for seconds afterward. No one slept that night. Something was out there. Something that could erase entire colonies, drain power, silence systems, and disappear without a trace. The Vigilant Dawn was the only ship that had seen the signs clearly. The crew didn't know if anyone would ever believe them, but they knew what they felt, and what they had witnessed could not be ignored. The captain finally recorded a personal log. It wasn't part of any official report. The words were simple. "If this is the beginning of something, we'll be here to see it." The warship that no one took seriously was now the last watcher in a silent corner of space. It was still small, still old, still underestimated, but in its quiet corridors, among tired hands and determined faces, something powerful had begun to stir, not in the engines, but in the hearts of those who refused to look away. Far beyond the edge of known space, the stars seemed to dim for a moment, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The Vigilant Dawn kept moving, unaware that it was already standing on the edge of history, the first to see the truth that would soon shake the galaxy. The days following the disappearance of the shadow were long and uneasy. The Vigilant Dawn continued its slow patrol, though no one truly believed in routine anymore. The stars looked the same, but every shimmer of light felt different now. The crew's nerves were stretched thin, and even the smallest sound made heads turn. No one said it aloud, but everyone was waiting for something they couldn't describe but felt deep inside. The captain had stopped sending daily reports. Command had not responded to the last 5 transmissions, and even automated beacons from nearby systems had gone dark. The ship's old communication panel now sat mostly silent. blinking faintly every few minutes as if hoping for an answer that would never come. Despite the silence, the crew kept working. They inspected the engines, polished old weapon mounts, recalibrated sensors, and tested the communication systems again and again. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about feeling prepared, about holding on to purpose when the galaxy seemed to have forgotten them. Then, one evening, the impossible happened. It started with a low sound, not through the speakers, but through the ship itself. A faint vibration rippled along the metal walls, steady and deep, like the slow beating of a distant heart. Every console flickered for a moment. The crew froze, staring at their screens. Then came the signal, sharp, brief, and strong. An object had appeared at the edge of the system. At first, the sensors refused to identify it. The readings jumped wildly. Mass, energy, movement. None of it made sense. The object was huge, easily the size of a small moon, but it wasn't solid. The surface shimmered like liquid light, constantly shifting, never still. No known material behaved that way. The captain ordered the ship to reduce power output and go dark. The vigilant dawn drifted quietly behind the shadow of a dead planet. Engines off, lights dimmed. Through the observation glass, the crew could see it now, far off in the distance, glowing faintly in the dark. It wasn't a reflection or an illusion. It was real, and it was moving closer. For hours, they watched in silence. The object didn't move like a ship. It didn't burn fuel, didn't pulse energy, didn't emit heat. It glided through space as though it didn't care about gravity or distance. When it passed near the debris field of an old satellite, the fragments didn't scatter. They simply vanished, leaving only empty space behind. The captain whispered one word: recording. Every camera, every sensor, every system began tracking the object. The data filled the screens like rain. Energy readings spiked higher than anything they had ever seen. It was as if the object wasn't made of metal or matter. It was something else entirely. Something alive, but not biological. Then, another signal appeared, smaller, weaker, moving alongside the large one. Then another, then 5 more. In less than 10 minutes, the system showed 9 separate contacts. Each one was the same, shapeless, glowing, silent. The crew exchanged tense looks. No one spoke. The youngest among them whispered, "Are they ships?" But no one answered, because no one knew. The captain finally gave a quiet order to prepare for emergency retreat. The ship's old engines hummed softly, power levels rising slowly to avoid detection. But before they could move, the sensors picked up something new, a faint burst of light from one of the far colonies. The colony that had gone silent weeks ago. The light wasn't random. It was a signal, a flare, artificial and brief. It lasted only seconds before disappearing. The crew watched in shock as one of the glowing objects changed direction immediately, turning toward the source of the light. In moments, the others followed. They moved fast, far faster than any known technology. The vigilant dawn stayed hidden, engines quiet, while the objects vanished into the distance. Then the scanners showed it, a sudden surge of radiation from the colony's location. It was so bright that it overloaded half the ship's sensors, and then silence again. The captain stood motionless, eyes on the screen. The crew waited, but there was nothing left to wait for. The colony was gone, not damaged, not destroyed in a visible sense, just gone. The readings showed an empty orbit where it once had been. The room was heavy with quiet. No one wanted to believe what they had seen, but denial was no longer possible. Whatever those things were, they were not ships. They were not alive in any way humans understood. They were something else, a force that erased rather than fought. The vigilant dawn powered up slowly and turned toward the last known location of the colony. The captain didn't wait for orders. They all knew there would be no response from command now. The ship's engines trembled as it accelerated into the emptiness ahead. As they drew closer, the sensors picked up faint fragments, bits of debris, pieces of rock, and metal dust floating in patterns too perfect to be natural. It was like the aftermath of a clean, deliberate sweep. There were no fires, no signals, not even static. The entire area was silent, as if it had been wiped clean from existence. The crew tried scanning for survivors, for signals, for anything. There was nothing. The captain quietly shut off the communications console. There was no point in sending a message that no one would answer. Hours passed as the ship drifted through the quiet. Then, unexpectedly, one of the smaller scanners detected a flicker of movement at the edge of their radar. Another object. Small, fast, moving straight toward them. The captain gave the order to raise power and divert shields to the front. The ship wasn't built for battle anymore, but instinct took over. The crew's hands moved quickly, activating old systems that hadn't been used in decades. The energy, cannon, the missile launchers, the defense grid, everything came online one by one, humming weakly but alive. Through the window, a dim light appeared, a streak, faint at first, growing brighter. It was moving at an incredible speed, too fast for comfort. The captain shouted to brace for impact, but just before it reached them, the object stopped. Stopped, completely. It floated there, only a few kilometers away, close enough to see its shape clearly now. It wasn't solid metal. It looked like liquid light, shifting and rippling, constantly changing shape. No surface, no engines, no markings. Just glowing energy moving like it was breathing. The crew stared in disbelief. The captain's hand hovered over the emergency command. No one moved. Then the thing began to emit a low hum. Not mechanical, not electronic, but something deep that vibrated through the walls and into their bones. Every light on the ship flickered. Systems dimmed. Power dropped by 30% instantly. The crew scrambled to keep the ship online. Whatever the object was doing, it was draining them, not attacking, but feeding on their energy somehow. The captain gave the order to fire. The old cannons glowed weakly, then released 2 shots of plasma into the void. The beams hit the glowing object directly. The impact was instant. Bright light flooded the ship's windows. For a brief second, the stars disappeared. Then, as the light faded, the object was still there, unharmed. It hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, hadn't changed. The captain stared at it, realization dawning slowly. The thing didn't even see them as a threat. To it, they were just noise. Then, without warning, the object shifted. It stretched, expanding outward in every direction, and then it was gone. Not destroyed, not moving away, just vanished, leaving nothing behind. The scanners showed clear space. The stars returned. The ship's systems slowly stabilized. Lights returned to normal. The crew sat in stunned silence, the only sound the low hum of the engines. The captain finally spoke, voice quiet but steady. "We've seen enough." They turned the ship away from the dead colony and began to retreat toward the nearest functioning relay station. But as the engines roared back to life, the radar picked up something again. Not one signal this time, but many. Dozens of them, appearing all across the system. The entire crew froze. Every screen on the bridge lit up with red warnings. The objects had returned, and this time they were everywhere. The vigilant dawn was now in the center of it all. Outside the window, faint points of light began to form in the distance. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, glowing like stars being born. The captain didn't shout. They simply looked at the vast field of light spreading across the void and whispered, "So it begins." The crew stood quietly, watching as the unknown fleet surrounded the stars. The vigilant dawn, the warship, no one took seriously, had just witnessed the beginning of something the galaxy wasn't prepared for, and they were the only ones left to tell the story. The captain set the recorder to full data capture, knowing that if they didn't make it out, at least someone might one day find the truth hidden in their last transmission. The ship adjusted its course toward the nearest communication relay, but in their hearts everyone knew that escape was no longer guaranteed. As the engines hummed softly, the crew exchanged quiet glances, each person understanding the same silent truth. They were alone against something beyond comprehension, and yet none of them ran. For the first time in decades, the old ship was fully alive. Every light, every weapon, every system was active. The vigilant dawn was ready, not because they thought they could win, but because they refused to be forgotten. In that moment, surrounded by an ocean of silent lights, humanity's oldest warship stood alone, facing the unknown. The crew didn't know what was coming next. All they knew was that the sky was changing, and soon the galaxy would too. The first strike came faster than anyone could react. The radar operator on the Vigilant Dawn saw the reading spike, and barely had time to shout a warning before the entire ship trembled under the shockwave. The crew was thrown against walls, sparks showered from overhead panels, and alarms screamed through every corridor. The enemy had found them. The quiet patrol ship that no one took seriously was now standing in front of something far beyond what any human had ever faced. But no one on board ran. No one froze. Every single one of them moved like their training had been waiting for this exact moment. The captain gave calm, short orders. His voice didn't rise, didn't shake, even as the deck tilted beneath his feet. The ship's sensors struggled to lock onto the enemy. There were too many signals moving too fast. The crew didn't have the advanced targeting systems that modern fleets used. What they did have was instinct, experience, and an old-fashioned system that relied more on the human eye and timing than machines. It made the Vigilant Dawn seem outdated, but in that moment, it gave them something the enemy couldn't predict: unpredictability itself. The first enemy volley ripped across the void, tearing apart pieces of the moon behind them. The crew watched as glowing fragments drifted into space. Their shields held for the moment, but cracks were forming in the power grid. The ship's engineer yelled over the noise that the reactor was overloading, but the captain didn't flinch. "Divert all non-essential power to forward shields," he said, eyes fixed on the display. "We'll only get one good chance." They knew the truth. There was no escape. The enemy's formation was tightening, surrounding them in a ring of cold precision. Each hostile craft moved exactly the same way, as if controlled by one mind. It didn't even seem alive. It was mechanical, cold, and efficient. Against that, the humans aboard the Vigilant Dawn were messy, shouting, improvising, disagreeing mid-battle. But somehow that chaos gave them life. The ship fired its first counterattack. The missiles streaked through space, old and small compared to modern weapons, but they struck with surprising accuracy. The first enemy vessel flared bright and spun out of control before breaking apart. For the first time in the entire invasion, the attackers hesitated. They had been programmed to expect surrender, not resistance, and definitely not pain. The bridge crew stared at the view ahead, unable to believe it. They had done it. They had actually damaged one of them. The captain's expression didn't change. He knew what was coming next. The enemy had paused not out of fear but calculation. They were adapting. Within seconds, the formation shifted, more units closing in. The enemy ships began to emit a strange hum, low, constant, and unnerving. The lights on the Vigilant Dawn flickered as if the sound itself was draining power. The captain ordered the crew to cut the main communications array and reroute everything into weapons. They didn't need words now. Every person aboard knew their role. The gunners' hands trembled as they reloaded the magnetic cannons manually, a task no one had done in decades. The hull rattled from another near hit. The pilot shouted that the navigation thrusters were down, leaving them half blind. The crew kept fighting. The ship's maneuvering became desperate but clever. They used nearby debris to mask their heat signatures, ducking behind shattered rock and dust clouds. It was a trick no machine could anticipate. Each move came from human instinct, quick thinking, guessing what the other side would expect and doing the opposite. In that unpredictable rhythm, they found survival. As the minutes dragged on, the ship groaned under the strain. Sections of the hull glowed red-hot. The medic rushed from one injured crew member to another, sealing cuts and burns while the floor shook. The smell of smoke filled the air, and the once smooth hum of the engines became a deep growl. But the captain kept his focus. He had fought in enough battles to know that fear spreads faster than fire. His calm was their anchor. At one point, the navigation officer shouted that they could still run, that they might find shelter behind the nearby planet. But the captain simply said, "No one's coming if we leave. We stay." The words settled into every heart aboard. It wasn't an order anymore, it was a promise. The enemy changed tactics. They began firing smaller bursts, testing the ship's limits. Each impact made the structure whine in protest. A breach opened on the lower deck, sucking out atmosphere and sending debris into the void. 2 crew members were lost instantly, and the rest sealed the section without hesitation. There was no time to mourn. The gunner fired another round, this time targeting the enemy's sensor nodes instead of their core. The shot hit perfectly, blinding part of their formation. The pilot used that tiny window to spin the Vigilant Dawn upside down, using its own damaged hull as a reflective shield against the next volley. The attack missed, striking one of the enemy's own ships. The explosion rippled through their tight formation, scattering them momentarily. The bridge crew broke into cheers for a second before the captain's quiet voice pulled them back. "Don't celebrate yet. They're learning faster than we can move." And he was right. The enemy ships reorganized, closing ranks again. But now something had changed. They weren't just attacking. They were studying. Each shot they fired came closer, more precise, more understanding of human behavior. The crew could feel the tension rising. The air felt heavy in every sound. The crackle of the comms, the hiss of vents, carried the weight of exhaustion. The engineer called up from below that the reactor's core was unstable. The damage to the cooling systems meant the ship had minutes, maybe less, before meltdown. The captain didn't hesitate. "Then we make those minutes count." He ordered all remaining power to be transferred to the weapons. The ship's lights dimmed as the cannons charged for one final barrage. The gunner locked targets even though every system warning screamed of overload. One by one, the old cannons fired, each recoil shaking the vessel like thunder. The shots tore through the enemy line, disabling 2 more of their crafts. The final blast left the ship powerless, drifting in silence. Alarms turned to a faint echo. The lights flickered once more, then went dark. The stars outside were still bright and the battlefield was full of wreckage. The crew could see the enemy pulling back slightly, uncertain. For the first time, the unstoppable machines seemed unsure. Inside the Vigilant Dawn, it was quiet except for the sound of their breathing. The captain looked out the viewport at the glowing debris. "We've done it," the pilot whispered. "We hurt them." But the captain didn't smile. He knew this wasn't the end. They had survived the first wave, but more would come. He looked around the damaged bridge, panels torn open, smoke curling from broken circuits, faces smeared with soot and sweat. "We'll repair what we can," he said finally. "They'll return, and when they do, they'll expect us to run. Let's make sure they're wrong." The surviving crew nodded. Some went below to fix power lines by hand. Others started patching hull plates with anything they could find. It wasn't enough to win, they all knew that. But it was enough to fight one more time. Outside in the darkness of space, the remaining enemy ships began to move again. Their movements were slower now, cautious. They had learned that humans, even with failing ships and broken weapons, would never surrender easily. The Vigilant Dawn floated among the stars, battered but alive. Its hull was scarred, its systems failing, yet it burned with something the machines couldn't understand: determination. The crew knew they were facing the end, but in that quiet moment, none of them felt fear. They felt pride. The galaxy had ignored them for years, laughed at their old ship, but now, as the void trembled under their defiance, they had finally proven what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. The battle was far from over, but something had shifted in the silence that followed. For the first time, the machines had seen unpredictability and fear in their perfect system. The Vigilant Dawn had shown them what it meant to fight not because you could win, but because you refused to give up. And in that endless dark, that small human warship became something more than metal. It became a symbol, a whisper in the stars that no one would ever forget. The moment came quietly. The ship floated in the dark, half dead and surrounded by silence. The crew sat at their posts, bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, but still alert. The stars outside seemed almost peaceful, as if the universe had paused to watch what would happen next. No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the soft hum of emergency lights and the faint crackling of damaged panels. The captain stood near the viewport, his face lit by the pale glow of distant starlight. He didn't have to look at the sensors to know the truth. The enemy wasn't gone. They were waiting, regrouping, watching from beyond the shadows. Everyone on the bridge felt it too, that quiet dread before the storm returns. The engineer's voice broke the silence. The reactor was unstable. The core had taken too much damage, and if they didn't act soon, the entire ship could explode on its own. The captain closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Prepare for one final charge," he said softly. The words sank into everyone's hearts. There was no surprise, no panic. They had known deep down this would be the end, but now it was clear they wouldn't die running. They would choose their ending. Each crew member moved with calm determination. The gunner checked what few weapons still worked, even though most were melted or drained. The pilot realigned the ship's nose toward the enemy's last known position. The engineer rerouted every drop of remaining power into the reactor. The medic secured the injured and helped strap everyone into their stations. The captain walked through the bridge slowly, resting a hand on each person's shoulder as he passed. No grand speeches, no farewell words, just a shared understanding. They had done their duty. They had shown what humans could be, not perfect, not powerful, but unbreakable. Outside, the darkness began to move. The enemy fleet was returning, this time in greater numbers. Cold, lifeless machines glided through space, forming a wide circle around the vigilant dawn. Their weapons glowed faintly, waiting for command. To them, the human ship was already defeated, a wounded relic clinging to existence. But still it pointed its nose toward them, weapons armed. Inside the ship, the temperature was rising. The engineer shouted that the core was reaching maximum levels. There was no going back now. The captain gave the order to broadcast one final message across all frequencies. The communications officer, hands trembling, asked what to say. The captain looked out into the stars and said quietly, "Tell them, we will hold the line." The message was sent, a simple human sentence that would echo across countless systems. Somewhere in distant command centers and colonies it would be heard, and people would know that the vigilant dawn hadn't fallen quietly. The lights inside the ship flickered. The hum of the reactor deepened into a roar. The metal beneath their feet began to vibrate as the ship absorbed every last ounce of power. The crew could feel it, the buildup, the growing heat, the energy pressing against the hull. Then, without warning, the enemy opened fire. The first barrage tore across the void, lighting up the darkness in flashes of blue and white. The vigilant dawn shuddered but didn't break. Panels exploded, glass shattered, but the ship stayed on course. The pilot pushed the last functional thrusters, guiding the ship straight into the heart of the enemy formation. "Now," the captain shouted. The engineer's hand hit the control. The explosion that followed was not like anything the galaxy had seen before. It wasn't just destruction, it was light. The ship's core went critical, unleashing a surge of pure energy that expanded faster than any weapon. The night sky turned into day. From nearby planets and stations, witnesses described it as a new sun being born for a moment, then vanishing into silence. Every enemy ship caught within that sphere of light disintegrated instantly. Metal vaporized, systems melted, and all signals vanished. When the light faded, there was nothing left but drifting fragments and a faint, glowing mist that marked the place where the vigilant dawn had once been. On the command ships far away, silence filled the rooms. Operators stared at their screens in disbelief. The impossible had happened. An old, forgotten warship had destroyed an entire enemy fleet by itself. The readings showed no survivors, no signals, nothing but radiation echoes and silence. For a long time, no one spoke. The galaxy had grown used to human weakness, to thinking of them as the youngest and most reckless species. But now, in one blinding moment, that belief shattered. The vigilant dawn had proven something that statistics and logic could never explain: the power of will. Back at Earth's Defense Command, the transmission of the final message played over and over. "We will hold the line." The words came through static, faint but clear. Many who heard it didn't know what it meant at first. Some thought it was a mistake, a ghost signal. But when the data arrived and when they saw the energy readings and the last known position of the ship, every room went quiet. The scientists called it an energy event. The military called it a sacrifice. But to ordinary people, it was something else entirely. It was a story, a reminder that courage wasn't found in new ships or advanced weapons, but in hearts that refused to give up even when the end was certain. For days, long-range scanners showed only faint ripples where the explosion had occurred. It was said that if you tuned your sensors just right, you could still hear the echo of the detonation, a whisper in the void, like the hum of a distant star. Pilots who passed through the area reported strange feelings, as if the air itself carried memories. Some swore they saw flickers of light in the debris field, shaped like the outline of a ship still flying. No one could confirm it, but many wanted to believe. The enemy was gone, erased from that sector. No one knew if they had more hidden fleets waiting elsewhere, but for now the silence was complete. The systems that had been under attack began to rebuild. Messages of thanks poured in from colonies that had been cut off, from families who realized they were still alive because of that single act of defiance. The captain's name was never broadcast publicly. Neither were the crews. The command decided that the ship's story should stand as a collective symbol, not of one man or woman, but of all who served aboard. A memorial beacon was placed in orbit near the site of the explosion. It transmitted a simple light pulse every few minutes, repeating endlessly through the dark, a heartbeat made of light. Years later, new ships were built, faster, stronger, equipped with technologies inspired by the Vigilant Dawn's final act. Yet none carried the same quiet weight. When recruits joined the fleet, they were told the story on their first day. Not as a legend, but as history, a reminder that sometimes the smallest ship can change the course of everything. Somewhere out in the endless night, the energy from that explosion still travels, faint but steady. Scientists say it will keep moving through the universe forever, a permanent scar of light that can never be erased. And maybe that's fitting, because the Vigilant Dawn didn't just destroy the enemy, it left behind something far more powerful, a reminder that even when hope seems lost, even when the world turns dark and the odds are impossible, humanity always finds a way to shine, even if only for one last, brilliant moment. No one took that old warship seriously. It had been forgotten, underestimated, ignored. But when the sky brightened and when silence finally fell, the galaxy understood. Some legends aren't born. They're forged in fire and sacrifice, and in the unshakable will to protect what matters most. And though nothing remained of the ship itself, its story lived on, and in every whisper, in every star, in every heart that refused to surrender. The Vigilant Dawn was gone, but its light would never fade. When the rescue fleets finally arrived at the edge of the destroyed sector, they expected to find wreckage, survivors, or at least signs of life. Instead, there was only silence. The scanners picked up nothing but drifting fragments, radiation fields, and a faint energy pulse that flickered like the heartbeat of something long gone. The place felt empty, yet heavy, as if the air itself carried memories of what had happened. The commander of the first arriving ship stood at the observation deck, staring at the glowing haze that still floated where the Vigilant Dawn had made its final stand. No one spoke for several minutes. Every person on that ship knew what had happened. The reports had already spread across every human colony. A single outdated warship had stopped an enemy fleet that had wiped out entire systems. And now all that was left of it was dust and echoes. When the sensors finally locked onto something solid, it was small, a single plate of metal drifting slowly in the void. The crew brought it aboard carefully, placing it under clean lights. The inscription was barely visible under the scorch marks, but they could still read it. Vigilant Dawn. The bridge went quiet. Some lowered their heads. Others simply stood still, not knowing what to say. The technician examining the plate whispered that the ship's core readings were beyond anything they had ever seen. The energy that had been released was enough to light an entire planet for years. It wasn't just an explosion. It had been controlled, deliberate. Someone aboard that ship had made sure their final act counted. When the full report reached Earth, there was no celebration, no public event. The government didn't issue grand speeches or parades. Instead, a simple message was sent across every human system. The crew of the Vigilant Dawn fulfilled their duty. They held the line. The words appeared on screens in colonies, mining stations, and star bases across the galaxy. People stopped whatever they were doing to read them. Some wept quietly. Others saluted their screens. It wasn't just a story about a ship anymore. It was a story about who humans were. The galaxy took notice too. Many alien races that had once mocked human stubbornness or doubted their strength began to speak differently. Some called it madness. Others called it courage. But all agreed that something had changed. Humanity, once seen as a minor force, had shown a kind of defiance the rest of the galaxy didn't understand. In the weeks that followed, search teams continued to comb the debris field, hoping to find anything, a log, a black box, a fragment of recording. They found nothing. The explosion had been too powerful. It was as if the Vigilant Dawn had erased itself completely, leaving only the faint trace of its sacrifice. But the strange thing was, the energy readings in that region didn't fade like normal radiation. They pulsed slowly, rhythmically, as if something of the ship still lived in the light. Pilots who traveled through that sector began to talk about it. Some said their navigation systems flickered when they passed through the area. Others swore they heard faint static on their radios, whispers that sounded like human voices saying, "Hold the line." No one could prove it, but many believed it. The place became known unofficially as the Dawn's Grave, but to most humans it was sacred ground. A few months later, a memorial station was built nearby. It wasn't grand or decorated. It was simple, a single platform orbiting the ruins with a beacon that pulsed gently every few seconds. Each pulse matched the energy rhythm left behind by the explosion. The engineers said it was like a heartbeat. Visitors who came to the station said it felt alive, as if the spirit of the ship still guarded the stars it had died protecting. The captain and crew were never named in official records. Command decided that their memory should belong to everyone, not a few individuals. But among those who served in the fleets, stories began to spread. People talked about how the captain had refused to abandon his ship, how the crew had worked until the last second, how their final message had given hope to billions. Every retelling added small details, but the heart of the story stayed the same. When everyone else lost faith, the vigilant Dawn stood firm. Years passed. New ships were built, stronger, faster, equipped with technologies inspired by the data recovered from that final explosion. Every ship that launched from Earth carried a small inscription engraved on its hull, "In the light of the dawn." It became more than a tribute. It was a promise that humanity would never forget the ones who gave everything to protect them. On Earth, a small museum was built with the recovered hull plate displayed at its center. Visitors lined up to see it. Families, students, veterans. The plate was old and blackened from fire, but under the lights the name could still be seen clearly. Some people said it felt warm when you stood close, as if the metal still carried the energy of that final moment. As generations passed, the story turned into legend. Children learned about the vigilant dawn in school, not as a tale of war, but as a lesson in courage. Teachers told them that being human wasn't about strength or power, but about standing firm when everything seems lost. The ship became a symbol of resilience, unity, and hope. Among the stars, ships passing through the region would lower their lights and fly silently for a minute in respect. It became a tradition that no one questioned. Even alien traders began to follow it, turning off their engines briefly when crossing the Dawn's Grave. The story had grown beyond humanity. It had become something larger, a reminder that bravery could exist in any corner of the universe. Still, there were those who believed the story wasn't truly over. Some pilots claimed to have seen something deep in the nebula, a faint light moving against the darkness, shaped like a ship. When they tried to scan it, it vanished. Scientists dismissed it as radiation reflection or sensor interference, but those who had heard the old stories believed otherwise. They said the vigilant dawn was still out there watching, waiting, making sure the silence stayed safe. One night, many years after the event, a young pilot on patrol near the area reported something strange. Her sensors caught a signal, old, distorted, and weak. She cleaned the feed and listened closely. It was just one sentence, broken by static. "If no one else will stand, we will." The message repeated once, then vanished. No trace, no coordinates, nothing. But for days afterward, every communications channel across the nearby sectors carried the story. People smiled when they heard it. Some thought it was a technical glitch. Others thought it was impossible. But a few old veterans simply nodded and said quietly, "The dawn still watches." Over time, the story of the vigilant dawn became part of who humans were. It reminded them that even when forgotten, even when underestimated, they could rise and shine brighter than anyone expected. It wasn't about victory. It was about defiance, the kind that comes from hearts that refuse to surrender. And so in that silent part of space where the stars still glimmer faintly against the ghost of the explosion, the legend lives on. Every pulse of the memorial beacon is like a whisper through time, steady, soft, eternal. Travelers say that if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it say, "We will hold the line." And in those words lies everything that makes humanity what it is: courage in despair, light in darkness, and hope that never fades. The galaxy remembers the silence that followed that final light, but humanity remembers the promise that came before it. The vigilant dawn may have vanished into the void, but its spirit still burns. not just among the stars, but in every soul that dares to stand when no one else will.